Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she walked across the dusty training range at Camp Pendleton. The California sun beat down mercilessly, making the metal targets shimmer in the distance like mirages. She had been working as a range technician for 3 months now, and the job was exactly what she had expected: routine, predictable, and safely removed from anything that resembled real danger. At 24, Sarah had already lived through more uncertainty than most people twice her age. Growing up in a small town outside San Antonio, she had watched her father struggle to find steady work after losing his job at the local factory. Her mother worked double shifts at the diner just to keep food on the table. When Sarah graduated high school, college seemed like an impossible dream, so she took whatever job she could find: retail, food service, cleaning offices at night. Nothing ever lasted long enough to build a real future. The opportunity at Camp Pendleton had come through a friend of a friend. The pay was decent, the benefits were real, and, for the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt like she might actually be building something stable. Her job was simple enough: maintain the shooting ranges, replace damaged targets, keep the equipment clean and organized. It was honest work that kept her busy without requiring her to think too hard about the bigger picture of what happened on these ranges. Most days, Sarah worked alone or with one other technician, usually an older man named Pete who had been doing this job for 15 years. Pete was quiet and methodical, teaching her the ins and outs of range maintenance without much small talk. He showed her how to properly hang the paper targets, how to check the backstops for damage, and how to spot potential safety issues before they became problems. The work was physical but not overwhelming, and Sarah found a certain satisfaction in the simple routine of it all. The Marines who used the ranges treated her with polite professionalism. Most barely acknowledged her presence, which suited Sarah just fine. She was there to do a job, not to make friends or get involved in military life. She had no military background herself and no particular interest in weapons or combat training. To her, the rifles were just tools that made noise and put holes in paper. The Marines were just customers who happened to wear uniforms instead of civilian clothes. On this particular Tuesday morning, Sarah was working the intermediate rifle range, replacing targets that had been shot to pieces during yesterday's qualification rounds. The range was officially closed for maintenance, which meant she could work without interruption. She moved methodically down the line of firing positions, pulling down the tattered remains of old targets and hanging fresh ones in their place. The targets themselves were simple affairs: black silhouettes printed on white paper, with scoring rings marked in different zones. Sarah had replaced thousands of them by now and rarely gave them much thought. They were just paper shapes, nothing more. She focused on making sure each one was perfectly centered and securely fastened. The Marines were particular about things being done right, and Sarah took pride in meeting their standards. As she worked her way down the 100-yard line, Sarah noticed a group of Marines gathering near the range control tower. They moved with a different kind of purpose than the regular training groups she was used to seeing. These men carried themselves with an intensity that was immediately noticeable, even from a distance. Their gear was different too, more specialized, more expensive looking. Everything about them suggested they were not ordinary Marines. Sarah tried not to stare as she continued her work, but she could not help noticing how they moved as a unit, communicating with hand signals and brief, quiet conversations. Even their casual movements seemed calculated and efficient. She had seen enough military training to recognize when she was looking at people who took their jobs very seriously, but this group operated on a different level entirely. One of them caught her attention in particular. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Unlike some of the younger Marines who carried themselves with obvious bravado, this man's confidence was quiet and controlled. He moved with the economy of someone who never wasted energy on unnecessary actions. When he spoke to the others, they listened immediately and completely. Sarah finished hanging her targets and began collecting the old ones for disposal. The work was mindless enough that she could do it automatically while trying to figure out what made this group different. She had serviced ranges for special operations training before, but something about today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that whatever these Marines were preparing for was more serious than routine training. As she loaded the damaged targets into her cart, Sarah overheard fragments of conversation from the group. They were discussing distances, wind conditions, and ammunition types with the kind of technical precision she had never heard in casual conversation. These were clearly people who understood their weapons at a level far beyond basic marksmanship. Every detail mattered to them in a way that suggested their lives might depend on getting things exactly right. The man who had caught her attention earlier approached the firing line and began setting up what looked like a significantly more advanced rifle than anything Sarah had seen on the ranges before. The weapon was fitted with an elaborate scope and other attachments that she could not identify. He handled it with the familiarity of someone who knew every component intimately, checking and adjusting various settings with practiced efficiency. Sarah tried to finish her work quickly and get out of their way, but as she moved to collect the last of the old targets, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat behind her. She turned to find the tall Marine standing a few feet away, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "I'm Master Sergeant Rodriguez. We're going to be using this range for some specialized training today. I wanted to let you know so you wouldn't be surprised by the noise level." Sarah nodded, trying to project the same kind of professional competence she saw in him. "Of course, Sergeant Rodriguez. I'm almost finished here. Will you need me to make any special preparations for the targets?" Rodriguez studied her for a moment, as if evaluating something she could not understand. "Actually, we might. What we're working on today requires some very specific target placement. Would you mind staying available for a few minutes in case we need adjustments?" The request surprised Sarah. Usually, the Marines preferred to handle their own equipment once training began. But Rodriguez seemed like the type of person who did not make casual requests, so she agreed to stay nearby in case they needed her assistance. As the training session began, Sarah found herself watching from the equipment shed, fascinated despite herself. This was clearly not ordinary marksmanship practice. The Marines were engaging targets at distances she had never seen attempted on this range, making shots that seemed impossible to her untrained eye. The precision was remarkable, but what struck her most was the complete focus and discipline of everyone involved. Rodriguez was clearly the leader of the group, and Sarah began to understand why. His shooting was extraordinary, but more than that, he seemed to elevate everyone around him. When younger Marines struggled with a particular technique, he would quietly offer guidance that immediately improved their performance. He demanded excellence but created an environment where excellence felt achievable. During a break in the action, Rodriguez approached Sarah again. "We're going to need some targets moved to different positions," he explained. "Some closer, some farther out. It's not standard placement, but it's important for what we're working on today." Sarah gathered her tools and followed him onto the range. As they walked, Rodriguez explained what they needed with the same precision he brought to everything else. The target placement was indeed unusual, creating scenarios that were much more complex than typical training situations. Sarah found herself asking questions about why certain positions were important, and Rodriguez answered thoughtfully, treating her questions as legitimate rather than annoying interruptions. As she worked to reposition the targets according to his specifications, Sarah began to see the range differently. What had always been just empty space marked by distance signs was actually a complex environment full of variables that could affect performance. Wind patterns, lighting conditions, angle of engagement. Rodriguez pointed out factors that Sarah had never considered but which clearly mattered enormously to anyone who needed to make accurate shots under pressure. The work took longer than expected, partly because Rodriguez was extremely particular about placement, and partly because Sarah found herself genuinely interested in understanding what they were trying to achieve. She had never thought much about marksmanship as anything more than putting bullets in targets, but watching these Marines work revealed layers of complexity she had never imagined. When they finished setting up the targets, Rodriguez thanked her with genuine appreciation. "This is going to make a real difference in our training today," he said. "I know this isn't your normal routine, but you've been very helpful." As Sarah walked back toward the equipment shed, she realized that something had shifted in how she thought about her work. The ranges were not just places where people practiced shooting at paper targets. They were places where people prepared for situations where precision and skill could mean the difference between life and death. The thought was both sobering and strangely inspiring. The training continued for several hours, with Sarah occasionally being called upon to make adjustments or replace targets that had been completely destroyed by the Marines' accurate shooting. Each time, Rodriguez took a moment to explain what they were working on and why the changes mattered. Sarah began to appreciate the incredible level of skill and dedication required to perform at this level. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about her own life and career in ways she had not expected. She had always seen her job as temporary, something to do while she figured out what she really wanted. But watching these Marines pursue excellence with such dedication made her wonder if she was selling herself short. Maybe there were opportunities for growth and development that she had not considered. The training session was winding down when something unexpected happened. One of the younger Marines was struggling with a particularly difficult shot sequence, becoming visibly frustrated with his performance. Rodriguez worked with him patiently, offering guidance and encouragement, but the Marine continued to struggle. Finally, Rodriguez called a break and walked over to where Sarah was organizing equipment. "Sarah," he said, using her name for the first time that day. "I know this might sound strange, but would you be interested in trying something?" Sarah looked at him with confusion. "I don't understand, Sergeant." Rodriguez smiled slightly, the first time she had seen him look anything other than completely serious. "You've been watching our training all day, asking good questions, really trying to understand what we're doing. I'm wondering if you might have some natural ability for this kind of work." The suggestion seemed absurd to Sarah. She had never fired a rifle in her life and had no interest in learning. "I appreciate the thought, but I don't think that's really my thing." "Just humor me," Rodriguez said. "Sometimes people surprise themselves. And honestly, seeing someone else succeed might help my Marine get past whatever mental block he's dealing with." Sarah hesitated. The idea of handling one of those sophisticated weapons was intimidating, and she did not want to embarrass herself in front of these highly trained professionals. But there was something in Rodriguez's manner that made it difficult to say no. He was not asking her to become a sniper overnight, he was simply suggesting she try something new. "I wouldn't even know how to hold it properly," Sarah said. "That's what I'm here for," Rodriguez replied. "I'll guide you through everything. No pressure, no expectations. Just an opportunity to try something different." Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself agreeing. Rodriguez led her to the firing line and began explaining the basics of rifle handling with the same patience and precision he had shown throughout the day. He showed her how to hold the weapon safely, how to sight through the scope, how to control her breathing and trigger pull. The rifle was heavier than Sarah had expected but felt solid and well-balanced in her hands. Rodriguez positioned himself beside her, close enough to guide her movements but not so close as to make her uncomfortable. His instructions were clear and easy to follow, delivered in a calm voice that helped her feel less nervous about the whole situation. "Don't worry about hitting anything in particular," Rodriguez said as Sarah settled into position behind the rifle. "Just focus on the fundamentals we just talked about. Breathe naturally, find your sight picture, and squeeze the trigger slowly and smoothly." Sarah tried to apply everything Rodriguez had taught her, aware that she was probably making dozens of mistakes but determined not to embarrass herself completely. She found the target in the scope, tried to control her breathing the way he had shown her, and slowly applied pressure to the trigger. The rifle's report was louder than she had expected, and the recoil surprised her, but she managed to stay in position and recover quickly. Rodriguez immediately moved to check the target through a spotting scope, and Sarah waited for him to politely tell her that she had missed by a wide margin. Instead, Rodriguez looked up from the scope with an expression of genuine surprise. "Sarah," he said slowly, "you need to see this." Sarah looked through the scope he offered and saw a neat hole in the target, well within the scoring rings. It was not a perfect shot by the standards of the Marines she had been watching, but it was far better than she had any right to expect for her first attempt. "That was just luck," Sarah said, but Rodriguez was already shaking his head. "Luck doesn't account for good form and smooth trigger control," he replied. "You have natural ability for this. Real natural ability." The other Marines had gathered around by now, and Sarah could see genuine respect in their expressions as they looked at the target. These were people who understood how difficult accurate shooting could be, and they recognized something significant in what she had just accomplished. Rodriguez looked at Sarah with an intensity that made her suddenly aware that this moment was more important than she had realized. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I think you should consider that maybe you're capable of more than you've been giving yourself credit for." As Sarah handed the rifle back to Rodriguez, she felt something she had not experienced in years, the possibility that her future might hold opportunities she had never imagined. The shot she had just made was just paper and ink, but somehow it felt like the first step toward something much larger and more meaningful than anything she had ever attempted before. For 3 weeks after that first shot, Sarah found herself thinking about Master Sergeant Rodriguez's words almost every day. The memory of that moment, the surprise in his eyes, the respect from the other Marines, the feeling of doing something she never thought possible, had lodged itself in her mind like a splinter she couldn't remove. Her regular work routine continued unchanged. She arrived at Camp Pendleton each morning, maintained the ranges, replaced targets, and went home to her small apartment off base. But everything felt different now. When she hung targets, she found herself studying them more carefully, noticing details she had never paid attention to before. When Marines practiced their marksmanship, she watched their form and technique with new understanding. Pete, her supervisor, noticed the change without being able to identify what was different. "You seem more focused lately," he mentioned one afternoon as they cleaned equipment together. "More interested in the work." Sarah wasn't sure how to explain what had happened to her. How could she tell Pete that a single rifle shot had somehow altered her entire perspective on her life and future? It sounded ridiculous even to her, but the feeling was undeniable. Something inside her had awakened that day, and it refused to go back to sleep. The opportunity to explore this new awareness came sooner than expected. Sarah was working the long-range shooting complex when she noticed the same group of Special Operations Marines setting up for another training session. Her pulse quickened as she recognized Rodriguez among them, moving with the same quiet confidence that had impressed her weeks earlier. This time, however, Sarah's presence on the range was not coincidental. When Rodriguez spotted her, he walked over with a purpose that suggested he had been hoping to see her again. "Sarah," he said, offering that slight smile she remembered from their first extended conversation. "I was wondering if you might be interested in some informal instruction. On your own time, of course." The invitation both thrilled and terrified her. Since that first shot, Sarah had found herself wondering what it would be like to really learn marksmanship properly, but she had not imagined that such an opportunity would actually present itself. Rodriguez was clearly not the type of person who made casual offers. "I don't know if I'm cut out for that kind of training," Sarah replied honestly. "What I did the other day was probably just beginner's luck." Rodriguez studied her face with the same intensity she had noticed during their first meeting. "Sarah, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've trained hundreds of Marines, and I can usually tell within the first few shots whether someone has natural ability. What you showed me wasn't luck. It was raw talent that could be developed into something really exceptional with the right guidance." The conviction in his voice was compelling, but Sarah still hesitated. "Even if that's true, I'm just a civilian contractor. I maintain ranges, I don't use them." "That's exactly why this could be valuable," Rodriguez explained. "You don't have any bad habits to break, no preconceived notions about how things should be done. You can learn the fundamentals correctly from the beginning." Over the next 20 minutes, Rodriguez outlined what he was proposing. Nothing official, nothing that would interfere with her regular work duties. Just some basic instruction during his team's training sessions, when range time was available and when her schedule permitted. He emphasized that there would be no pressure and no expectations beyond her own interest in learning. Sarah found herself agreeing before she had fully processed all the implications. There was something about Rodriguez's quiet confidence and obvious expertise that made his offer feel like an opportunity she would regret passing up. Plus, the memory of that first successful shot continued to intrigue her. What if there really was something there worth developing? Their first official lesson took place the following Tuesday afternoon. Rodriguez had arranged for them to use a section of the intermediate range during a scheduled maintenance period. He brought a different rifle this time, still sophisticated by Sarah's standards, but more appropriate for basic instruction than the specialized weapon she had used before. "Today we're going to focus entirely on fundamentals," Rodriguez explained as they walked to the firing line. "Body position, breathing, sight alignment, trigger control. These are the building blocks that everything else is built on. Master these, and you'll be able to shoot accurately with any rifle. Skip them, and you'll never reach your potential no matter how much you practice." Rodriguez proved to be an exceptional instructor. He had a gift for breaking down complex concepts into simple, understandable components. More importantly, he had the patience to let Sarah work through each element at her own pace, offering gentle corrections and encouragement without ever making her feel rushed or inadequate. The shooting positions came more naturally to Sarah than she had expected. Rodriguez showed her how to build a stable platform with her body, how to use bone support rather than muscle tension, how to find her natural point of aim. Within an hour, she was consistently hitting targets at distances that had seemed impossible just weeks before. You have exceptionally good body awareness, Rodriguez observed as Sarah completed a string of shots that grouped tightly around the target center. Most people fight their natural balance and alignment. You seem to find it instinctively. Between shooting sessions, Rodriguez shared stories about his own development as a marksman. He had grown up hunting in rural Texas, learning basic rifle skills from his grandfather, but his real education had come through years of military training and operational experience. He spoke about the difference between recreational shooting and the kind of precision required in life-or-death situations. Accuracy under stress is a completely different skill set, he explained as they walked back to examine their targets. You can shoot perfect groups all day on a peaceful range, but when people are shooting back at you, when lives depend on making that shot, everything changes. That's what separates recreational marksmen from true professionals. Sarah found herself fascinated by these insights into a world she had never considered. The technical aspects of marksmanship were challenging and engaging, but the mental and emotional dimensions were equally compelling. Rodriguez described the kind of focus and discipline required to perform under extreme pressure, the years of training needed to develop unshakable confidence in critical moments. As their training sessions continued over the following weeks, Sarah began to understand why Rodriguez had seen potential in her. She consistently demonstrated the ability to learn new techniques quickly and apply them accurately. More importantly, she seemed to have a natural calmness under pressure that served her well even in the controlled environment of training. Their third session introduced Sarah to longer-range shooting, distances where environmental factors like wind and atmospheric conditions began to significantly affect bullet trajectory. Rodriguez taught her to read wind patterns by watching grass movement and dust patterns, to estimate distances by studying terrain features, to make calculations that accounted for temperature and altitude. Long-range shooting is as much about environmental awareness as mechanical skill, Rodriguez explained as Sarah prepared for a particularly challenging shot at a target position nearly 300 yards away. You have to become a student of conditions, constantly gathering information about factors that most people never notice. Sarah found this aspect of marksmanship especially appealing. It transformed shooting from a simple mechanical task into a complex problem-solving exercise that engaged her intellectually as well as physically. Each shot required her to analyze multiple variables, make calculations, and then execute with precision. It was like solving a puzzle where the pieces were constantly changing. The shot she made that day, a clean hit on a small target at maximum range for the training rifle, marked another turning point in her development. Rodriguez's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. This was not just good shooting for a beginner, this was exceptional performance by any standard. Sarah, Rodriguez said as they examined the target together, I think we need to have a serious conversation about your future. That evening, over coffee at a small diner near the base, Rodriguez outlined possibilities that Sarah had never imagined. Military marksmanship offered career paths that could provide both personal fulfillment and financial security. The skills she was developing could open doors to opportunities in law enforcement, competitive shooting, military contracting, or even specialized roles within the armed forces themselves. I'm not trying to pressure you into anything, Rodriguez emphasized. But you have a rare combination of natural ability and mental discipline. It would be a waste not to explore where that could lead. Sarah listened with growing excitement and trepidation. The future Rodriguez described sounded both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent her adult life in jobs that required little skill and offered few opportunities for advancement. The idea that she might have talent for something both challenging and rewarding was intoxicating. But it also meant leaving behind everything familiar and safe. Her current job might not be exciting, but it was predictable and secure. Pursuing marksmanship seriously would require taking risks, making commitments, and stepping into a world where the stakes were much higher than anything she had ever experienced. How would someone like me even begin to explore those possibilities? Sarah asked. Rodriguez had clearly been thinking about this question. There are several paths, he explained. Military enlistment is the most obvious route, but there are also civilian training programs, competitive shooting circuits, and specialized schools that could help you develop your skills further. Over the next hour, Rodriguez outlined specific opportunities and contacts that could help Sarah explore her options. He mentioned training programs that accepted civilian students, competitive events where she could test her skills against other marksmen, and organizations that recruited talented shooters for various specialized roles. As they talked, Sarah realized that Rodriguez was offering her something far more valuable than shooting lessons. He was giving her a roadmap to a completely different life, one where her abilities would be valued and challenged. The choice of whether to pursue that path was entirely hers, but, for the first time, she could see a future that excited rather than merely sustained her. The conversation ended with Sarah agreeing to attend a civilian marksmanship competition that Rodriguez recommended. It would be her first opportunity to see how her developing skills compared to those of experienced shooters from outside the military. More importantly, it would help her understand whether the confidence she felt on the familiar ranges at Camp Pendleton would translate to different environments and more challenging conditions. As Sarah drove home that night, her mind raced with possibilities. 6 months ago, her biggest career decision had been whether to work overtime on weekends. Now she was contemplating a fundamental change in direction that could reshape her entire future. The prospect was both exhilarating and overwhelming. She thought about the path that had led her to this moment. The combination of circumstances that had placed her on that range when Rodriguez and his team were training. The single shot that had revealed abilities she never knew she possessed. The patience and expertise of an instructor who had seen potential where she had seen only uncertainty. But, mostly, she thought about the feeling she experienced when everything came together perfectly, her body position, breathing, sight alignment, and trigger control combining to send a bullet exactly where she intended it to go. It was a sensation of complete control and precision that she had never felt in any other aspect of her life. For the first time since high school, Sarah began to imagine a future where she could be truly excellent at something that mattered. The details remained unclear, but the possibility was real and growing stronger with each successful shot. Rodriguez had given her more than shooting lessons, he had given her permission to believe that she could be extraordinary at something important. The civilian marksmanship competition was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Held at a sprawling facility in the mountains east of San Diego, the event drew shooters from across the Southwest, military veterans, law enforcement officers, competitive enthusiasts, and serious hobbyists who had been perfecting their skills for years. Sarah arrived early Saturday morning, her stomach tight with nervous energy. Rodriguez had driven out with her, ostensibly to provide support and guidance, but she suspected he was also curious to see how his unconventional student would perform against seasoned competition. He had prepared her thoroughly, but there was no substitute for real-world experience under pressure. The facility itself was intimidating. Multiple ranges stretched out across the valley floor, with targets positioned at distances from 100 to 1,000 yards. Competitors moved between stations with practiced efficiency, wheeling cases of specialized equipment and discussing technical details that were mostly beyond Sarah's understanding. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing except for her. "Remember," Rodriguez said quietly as they checked in at the registration table, "you're not here to win anything today. You're here to learn how you respond to competition pressure and to see where your current skill level stands relative to experienced shooters. Anything else is just bonus." The competition was structured as a series of stages, each designed to test different aspects of marksmanship skill. Precision shooting from stable positions, rapid engagement of multiple targets, shooting from improvised positions, and long-range accuracy under time pressure. Sarah had practiced versions of all these skills with Rodriguez, but never in combination and never with the added stress of formal competition. Her first stage was precision shooting from the prone position at 200 yards. 5 shots in 10 minutes at a target with a scoring zone smaller than a dinner plate. Sarah had made similar shots consistently in training, but, as she settled into position, she was acutely aware of the other competitors around her and the officials timing her performance. Rodriguez had taught her to use pre-shot routines to manage stress and maintain consistency. Sarah went through the sequence he had drilled into her: establish position, check natural point of aim, control breathing, verify sight picture, smooth trigger press. The first shot felt good, and, when she checked through her spotting scope, she saw it had landed well within the scoring zone. The remaining 4 shots followed the same pattern. Sarah found that the familiar rhythm of her routine helped her ignore the external pressure and focus on executing each shot properly. When time was called, all 5 of her rounds had grouped tightly near the center of the target. Not perfect, but competitive with what she could see of other shooters' results. "How do you feel?" Rodriguez asked as they moved to the next stage. "Nervous but good," Sarah replied honestly. "It's different from training, but not as overwhelming as I expected." The second stage introduced time pressure and multiple targets. Sarah had to engage 5 different targets in rapid succession, with only 2 minutes to complete the entire sequence. This required smooth transitions between targets, quick reacquisition of sight pictures, and the ability to make accurate shots without excessive deliberation. Rodriguez had prepared her for this type of shooting, but Sarah had never attempted it in competition conditions. As the timer started, she forced herself to move deliberately rather than rushing. Smooth was fast, Rodriguez had always told her. Better to be methodical and accurate than quick and sloppy. The stage went better than Sarah had dared to hope. She engaged all 5 targets within the time limit and scored hits on each one. Not perfect scores, but solid hits that demonstrated she could maintain accuracy while working under pressure. Several other competitors nodded approvingly as they examined her target, and Sarah began to feel a growing sense of confidence. The third stage was where Sarah's lack of experience began to show. Shooting from improvised positions, standing unsupported, kneeling with no artificial rest, sitting cross-legged, required techniques that could only be developed through extensive practice. Rodriguez had introduced her to these positions, but she lacked the muscle memory and stability that veteran shooters had developed over years. Her scores on this stage were noticeably lower than on the previous 2. Not embarrassingly bad, but clearly the work of someone still learning the fundamentals of field shooting. Sarah felt frustrated with her performance, but Rodriguez reminded her that this stage would identify areas where she needed more training. Everyone struggles with unsupported positions when they start competing, he told her during the break between stages. It's the difference between range shooting and field shooting. You're doing fine for someone with your level of experience. The fourth and final stage was long-range precision shooting at 400 yards. Only one shot, but it counted for a significant portion of the overall score. Environmental conditions were challenging, a gusty crosswind that required careful reading and compensation. Sarah had practiced at this distance, but never with wind conditions this variable. As she studied the range conditions, Sarah applied everything Rodriguez had taught her about reading wind. She watched the grass movement at different distances, noted how dust was being blown by gusts, and tried to estimate the average wind speed and direction. The calculations were complex, but she had learned to trust her ability to make the necessary adjustments. The shot felt good when she took it. Clean trigger break, good follow-through, no apparent errors in execution. But long-range shooting involved so many variables that results were never certain until the target was scored. Sarah waited anxiously as officials examined her target through high-powered spotting scopes. When the results were announced, Sarah's shot had landed just outside the highest scoring zone, close enough to show that her fundamentals were sound, but not quite precise enough for maximum points. She was disappointed but not discouraged. The shot demonstrated that she was capable of making accurate hits at challenging distances under competition stress. Overall, Sarah finished in the upper third of her division, remarkable for someone competing for the first time. More importantly, she had learned valuable lessons about her current capabilities and areas where additional training would be beneficial. The competition had revealed both strengths and weaknesses in ways that ordinary practice could never match. As they drove back toward Camp Pendleton that evening, Rodriguez was clearly pleased with Sarah's performance. "You exceeded my expectations today," he told her. "More importantly, you handled the pressure well and learned from each stage. That's the mark of someone who has real potential for improvement." Sarah felt a satisfaction unlike anything she had experienced in her working life. The competition had been challenging and sometimes frustrating, but it had also been deeply engaging. Every shot had mattered, every decision had consequences, and success required the integration of physical skills, mental focus, and technical knowledge. "What's the next step?" Sarah asked as they neared the base. Rodriguez had been waiting for this question. "That depends on how serious you want to get about this. There are opportunities available, but they would require significant commitment from you." Over the next several days, Rodriguez introduced Sarah to possibilities she had never considered. Military recruitment was one option. The Marine Corps had specialized roles for exceptional marksmen, and her demonstrated ability would make her a strong candidate. But there were also civilian opportunities in law enforcement training, private security contracting, and competitive shooting that could provide career paths without requiring military service. The most intriguing possibility was a training program run by a private organization that worked with various government agencies. They recruited individuals with exceptional marksmanship potential and provided intensive instruction that could lead to specialized roles in federal law enforcement, military contracting, or other high-level positions. "The program is extremely selective," Rodriguez explained. They only accept about 10% of applicants, and the training is demanding. But graduates are virtually guaranteed placement in well-paying positions where their skills are valued. The application process would require letters of recommendation, demonstrated proficiency tests, and extensive background investigation. Rodriguez had already offered to provide a recommendation, and Sarah's competition performance provided concrete evidence of her abilities. But acceptance would mean leaving her current job and committing to an uncertain future in a field she had only recently discovered. Sarah spent sleepless nights weighing her options. Her current life was safe and predictable, but it offered little opportunity for growth or achievement. The marksmanship path Rodriguez had revealed was risky and demanding, but it promised the chance to excel at something meaningful and financially rewarding. The decision crystallized during another training session with Rodriguez. They were working on advanced techniques, shooting from unusual positions, engaging targets partially concealed by obstacles, making rapid shots at varying distances. Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the challenges, applying everything she had learned while constantly discovering new layers of complexity. As she made a particularly difficult shot from an awkward position, Rodriguez looked at her with an expression that mixed pride and something approaching amazement. "Sarah," he said quietly, "in 15 years of training Marines, I've never seen anyone progress this quickly or show this much natural ability. You have a gift for this that shouldn't be wasted." That evening, Sarah filled out the application for the specialized training program. The paperwork required her to document every aspect of her background, explain her interest in marksmanship, and commit to completing the training regardless of its difficulty. As she signed the final page, she realized she was taking the biggest risk of her adult life. But it no longer felt like a risk in the traditional sense. Every training session with Rodriguez had built her confidence and demonstrated her potential. The competition had proved that her skills could hold up under pressure against experienced shooters. Most importantly, she had discovered something she was naturally good at and genuinely passionate about pursuing. The application process took 3 weeks, during which Sarah continued her regular work while training intensively with Rodriguez whenever possible. He pushed her harder than ever, introducing advanced techniques and challenging scenarios that would prepare her for whatever evaluation the program required. When the acceptance letter arrived, Sarah stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside was an invitation to report for evaluation and initial training at a facility in Virginia, with the understanding that successful completion could lead to career opportunities she had never imagined possible. Rodriguez's reaction when she told him was immediate and unequivocal. "This is exactly what you should be doing," he said. "You have abilities that are too rare to waste on anything less than their full potential." 2 months later, as Sarah packed her belongings for the move to Virginia, she reflected on the series of seemingly small events that had led to this moment. A chance encounter with exceptional Marines, a single rifle shot that revealed hidden talent, patient instruction from someone who recognized potential where others saw only inexperience. She thought about the young woman who had arrived at Camp Pendleton 9 months earlier, looking for nothing more than steady work and basic security. That person had been content with maintaining equipment and staying invisible. The woman preparing to leave for advanced training was someone entirely different, someone willing to pursue excellence even when it required leaving safety behind. Rodriguez came to see her off at the airport. "Remember everything we've worked on," he told her. "But, more importantly, remember that you belong wherever your abilities take you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As her plane lifted off from San Diego, Sarah looked down at Camp Pendleton growing smaller below. Somewhere down there was the range where she had made her first accurate shot, the place where Rodriguez had first placed a rifle in her hands and suggested she might be capable of more than she knew. She was no longer the woman who had been content to swap out targets and maintain equipment. That person had been transformed by the discovery that she possessed rare abilities and the courage to pursue them wherever they might lead. The future was uncertain, but, for the first time in her life, Sarah was confident it would be extraordinary. 18 months later, Sarah Martinez stood on a rooftop in downtown Los Angeles, her eye pressed to the scope of a precision rifle that had cost more than she used to make in 6 months. Below her, federal agents were preparing to execute a high-risk warrant on a building where armed suspects had barricaded themselves with hostages. Her job was to provide overwatch, to ensure that if something went wrong, accurate fire could be delivered instantly to protect innocent lives. The transformation from range technician to federal contractor had been more demanding than anything Sarah could have imagined when she first applied to the specialized training program. The 18-week course in Virginia had pushed her to physical and mental limits she had not known existed. She had learned not just advanced marksmanship, but tactical medicine, communications protocols, legal limitations on use of force, and the psychological techniques necessary to perform under extreme stress. Of the 24 people who had started the program with her, only 11 had completed it successfully. The attrition had not been due to any single overwhelming challenge, but rather to the relentless accumulation of pressure, precision requirements, and emotional demands that defined the training. Sarah had survived by applying the same methodical approach Rodriguez had taught her on the ranges at Camp Pendleton, breaking complex challenges into manageable components and executing each one with complete focus. Her first assignment after graduation had been with a federal task force specializing in high-risk operations in urban environments. The work combined everything she had learned about precision shooting with real-world scenarios where lives genuinely hung in the balance. It was exactly what Rodriguez had prepared her for, though the stakes were higher than anything they had practiced together. Today's operation was typical of her assignments. Intelligence indicated that armed criminals were holding 3 civilians hostage in a downtown office building. Conventional assault would risk civilian casualties, but the suspects had made it clear they would harm the hostages if demands were not met. Sarah's role was to eliminate that threat if negotiations failed and an immediate shot became necessary to save innocent lives. She had been in position since before dawn, carefully studying the target building and identifying potential firing solutions. Her rifle was equipped with advanced optics that allowed her to clearly observe activities inside the building, and she maintained constant communication with the tactical team leader through a secure radio system. Every detail had been planned and rehearsed, but she knew from experience that operations rarely unfolded exactly as expected. The radio crackled in her earpiece. "Overwatch, this is Ground 1. We have movement in the northeast window, 2nd floor. Can you confirm target identification?" Sarah adjusted her scope and focused on the indicated location. Through the window, she could see one of the suspects moving erratically, waving what appeared to be a pistol. Behind him, partially obscured but clearly visible, was one of the hostages, a young woman who appeared to be injured and terrified. "Ground 1, Overwatch. I have positive identification on one armed suspect, northeast window 2nd floor. One hostage visible in background, approximately 4 feet behind suspect. Angle is viable for clean engagement if required." The precision required for this type of shooting was extraordinary. Sarah would need to deliver a bullet to a target no larger than a playing card, through a window, at a distance of nearly 200 meters, with complete confidence that there would be no collateral damage to innocent people. It was exactly the type of shot that had seemed impossible when she first picked up a rifle with Rodriguez. For the next 2 hours, Sarah maintained her position while negotiators worked to resolve the situation peacefully. The physical demands of remaining motionless for extended periods while maintaining complete readiness to shoot accurately were considerable, but her training had prepared her for exactly these conditions. She monitored the situation through her scope, providing regular updates to the tactical team while remaining prepared to act instantly if circumstances required it. The crisis escalated suddenly when one of the suspects became increasingly agitated and began threatening to harm hostages if his demands were not met immediately. Through her scope, Sarah could see him becoming more erratic and dangerous. The tactical team leader's voice came through her earpiece with new urgency. "Overwatch, situation is deteriorating rapidly. Suspect is threatening immediate violence against hostages. Stand by for possible green light." Sarah's training took over completely. She verified her rifle 0, confirmed environmental conditions, and prepared for what might be an immediate shot under maximum pressure. Her breathing became controlled and rhythmic, her body settled into the stable position that had become second nature through countless hours of practice. "Overwatch, you are authorized to engage if suspect presents immediate threat to hostage safety. Confirm ready status. Ground 1, Overwatch is ready. I have clear sight picture and viable shot angle. Standing by." Through her scope, Sarah watched the suspect's behavior become increasingly threatening. He was now holding his weapon directly against one of the hostages, and his body language indicated he was preparing to carry out his threats. The moment that had been theoretical throughout all her training was now immediate and real. The shot, when it came, was a product of hundreds of hours of preparation and training. Sarah's finger found the trigger with the same smooth pressure Rodriguez had taught her on her first day of instruction. The rifle's report seemed distant and muted, but she immediately saw through her scope that the threat had been eliminated cleanly and precisely. "Ground 1, threat neutralized. hostage appears unharmed. I say again, suspect is down and hostage appears safe. The tactical team moved immediately to secure the building and rescue the remaining hostages. Within minutes, Sarah received confirmation that all civilians were safe and the operation was successfully concluded. She remained in position until given clearance to pack up her equipment, but the immediate crisis was over. As she broke down her rifle and prepared to leave the rooftop, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. 18 months ago, she had been maintaining shooting ranges and living paycheck to paycheck with no clear direction for her future. Today, she had used skills she never knew she possessed to save innocent lives in a situation where failure was not an option. The technical aspects of the shot had been well within her capabilities. The distance, environmental conditions, and target size were similar to challenges she had practiced regularly. But the psychological pressure of knowing that real lives depended on her performance had added a dimension that no training could fully replicate. She had discovered that she could function effectively under that level of stress, a realization that both surprised and satisfied her. Later that evening, Sarah called Rodriguez from her hotel room. They had maintained contact throughout her training and early career, and she knew he would want to hear about this operation. When she described what had happened, his response was exactly what she had expected. "I'm proud of you, but not surprised," he said. "You had the ability and character for this kind of work from the beginning. Today just proved it to yourself and everyone else." Their conversation turned to Sarah's future plans. The success of today's operation would likely lead to additional assignments and opportunities for career advancement. The specialized skills she had developed were in high demand, and her proven performance under pressure made her a valuable asset to any organization requiring precision shooting capabilities. But Sarah found herself thinking beyond just the technical aspects of her work. The training program had taught her that exceptional marksmanship was about more than just accurate shooting. It required judgment, discipline, emotional control, and the ability to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. These were qualities that had applications far beyond tactical operations. "I've been thinking about instruction," Sarah told Rodriguez. "About maybe helping other people discover what they're capable of, the way you did for me." Rodriguez was immediately interested. Teaching had always been an important part of his role, and he understood the satisfaction that came from helping others reach their potential. He had seen Sarah's natural abilities from their first meeting, but he had also watched her develop the patience and communication skills necessary to be an effective instructor. Over the following months, Sarah began incorporating teaching responsibilities into her contract work. She discovered that she had inherited Rodriguez's gift for identifying potential in unexpected places and helping people develop abilities they had not known they possessed. Her own unconventional path to expertise gave her unique credibility with students who might otherwise doubt their capabilities. 1 year later, Sarah received a letter that brought her journey full circle. A young man who worked as a maintenance technician at a private shooting facility had been watching skilled shooters practice and wondering if he might have similar abilities. His supervisor had mentioned Sarah's story and suggested he contact her for advice. As Sarah read his letter, she was reminded of her own feelings of uncertainty and possibility when Rodriguez had first suggested she try shooting. The young man's questions were almost identical to the doubts she had expressed, wondering if someone with no background in marksmanship could possibly develop serious skills, questioning whether natural ability could overcome lack of experience and training. Sarah's response was immediate and definitive. She invited him to visit her training facility for an evaluation, offering the same kind of opportunity Rodriguez had provided for her. As she wrote the invitation, she realized that her own transformation was now complete. She had evolved from someone who discovered hidden talents to someone who could help others make the same discovery. The day the young technician arrived for his evaluation, Sarah took him to the same type of intermediate range where Rodriguez had first handed her a rifle. She explained the basics of safe gun handling and fundamental marksmanship techniques with the same patience and precision that had been shown to her. When he fired his first shot and looked up with surprise at how close it had come to the target center, Sarah saw in his expression the same mixture of amazement and possibility that she remembered feeling during her own first attempt. The cycle was beginning again, with her now in Rodriguez's role and another unlikely candidate about to discover capabilities they had never imagined. "That was a very good first shot," Sarah told him, echoing words that had changed her life. "I think you might have real natural ability for this kind of work." As she watched him absorb this possibility, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that first day on the range with Rodriguez. She had gone from swapping out paper targets to saving real lives, from minimum wage maintenance work to specialized federal contracting, from someone who doubted her own potential to someone who helped others discover theirs. The transformation had required courage, dedication, and the willingness to risk everything familiar for the possibility of something extraordinary. But, standing on this range, watching another person take their first steps toward discovering hidden talents, Sarah knew that every challenge and sacrifice had been worthwhile. She had found her calling not just in the technical mastery of precision shooting, but in the deeper mission of helping people recognize and develop their own exceptional abilities. It was work that mattered, work that saved lives, and work that created opportunities for others to transform their own futures. Rodriguez had been right from the beginning. She had been capable of far more than she had ever imagined. The only question had been whether she would have the courage to find out just how extraordinary she could become. Now, as she guided another unlikely candidate toward that same discovery, Sarah understood that her greatest achievement was not any single shot she had made, but the wisdom to recognize potential wherever it appeared and the commitment to help it flourish.